Marcel Duval hadn't said a woman's name out loud in 2 years. He'd trained himself the way he trained for everything else, through repetition and control. Every time her face floated up behind his eyes, he'd replace it with a number, a deal, a problem that needed solving. It worked, most nights. The restaurant smelled like old money, seared truffle, oak-aged bourbon, the quiet arrogance of men who never see a check. Marcel sat at a corner booth flanked by reinforced glass and 2 men who'd kill on a hand signal. Jared was to his right, running logistics on a port deal worth 8 figures. Alex sat across, quiet, watchful. This was a Tuesday. Then Marcel saw her. Not all at once. First, it was the walk, that specific way she shifted weight to her left side when she was tired. Then the hands, steadying a tray with her fingertips, not her palms, like she was holding something precious. Then the belly. 7, maybe 8 months. Full, heavy, unmistakable. His throat closed. Because the woman crossing that dining floor carrying someone else's champagne was Samantha. His Samantha. The woman who vanished 2 years ago and left nothing behind but a handwritten note and a ring on the kitchen counter. Marcel didn't move, didn't breathe. His eyes tracked her like a scope finding a target. Then Samantha looked up. She saw him, her lips parted, the tray trembled. But here's what broke everything open. The terror that flooded her face wasn't aimed at Marcel. Her eyes had slid right past him and locked, frozen, on the man sitting to his right. Jared. Marcel's most trusted lieutenant. The man who'd held him together the night Samantha left. The man who'd arrived at his apartment that night within minutes, almost too quickly, now that Marcel thought about it, whispering, "She was seen leaving with someone else, brother. Let her go." Samantha's tray hit the floor. Glass shattered across Italian marble. And in the silence that followed, Marcel felt something shift, not in the room, but in the architecture of everything he'd believed for the last 2 years. Because Samantha wasn't looking at Jared the way you look at a stranger. She was looking at him the way you look at the person who promised to destroy you if you ever opened your mouth. Before we get into this, and trust me, you are not ready for where this story goes. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now. Not later, not at the end. Now, because this channel tells stories that don't let you go when they're over. They follow you. They sit in your chest. And this one about Marcel and Samantha, it's going to rearrange something inside you, like buttons right there. Tap it, settle in, and let me take you somewhere you won't see coming. The glass was still settling on the marble when Elijah came through the kitchen doors like a man who'd been waiting for exactly this moment. He was the kind of manager who wore his authority like a rented suit, tight in the wrong places, obvious to everyone but him. Mid-30s, thinning hair gelled flat, the sort of man who confused volume for power because he'd never been in the same room as the real thing. Samantha, he said her name the way you'd say a stain, loud, deliberate, aimed at the dining room as much as at her. That's the second tray this week. Samantha was already on her knees, picking up shards with her bare hands. Her belly made the angle impossible. She had to twist sideways, one palm flat on the wet floor for balance. A piece of glass nicked her thumb. She didn't flinch. She just kept collecting the pieces like a woman who'd learned that stopping meant something worse than bleeding. "I'll cover the cost," she said quietly. "Just take it from my check." "Your check?" Elijah laughed, a short, performative bark meant for the tables nearby. "At this rate, you'll owe me by Friday." Marcel watched from the booth. His hands were flat on the table, perfectly still. Alex had gone rigid across from him. Jared and Marcel noticed this the way a man notices a crack in a foundation he thought was solid. Jared was looking at his phone. Deliberately, casually, like nothing on that dining floor concerned him. Elijah crouched down next to Samantha. Not to help, to be closer to her ear while keeping his voice loud enough to carry. "I told you when I hired you, I don't do charity. You want to waddle around my floor-dropping inventory, there are diners on 9th Street that'll let you." He grabbed her arm just above the wrist and pulled her upward, not gently, the way you'd yank a dog's leash. "Get up! You're embarrassing yourself." Samantha's face didn't crumble. That's what got Marcel. It didn't crumble because it had already been crumbled so many times there was nothing left to break. She just absorbed it, the grip, the humiliation. The eyes of 40 strangers pretending their salmon was fascinating. The way someone absorbs weather. Like it was just the cost of being alive today. Marcel stood. He didn't push back his chair. He rose the way smoke rises, slow, inevitable, filling the space before anyone realizes the air has changed. Alex started to move with him. Marcel placed one hand on the table without looking back, and Alex sat down. The dining room didn't go quiet all at once. It went quiet in waves, table by table, conversation by conversation, as Marcel crossed the floor. By the time he reached Samantha, the only sound was the ambient piano and Elijah's breathing. Marcel didn't look at Samantha. He looked at Elijah's hand, the one still wrapped around her wrist, the way a surgeon looks at something he's about to remove. Then he reached down and peeled Elijah's fingers off her arm, one by one, deliberately, the way you'd dismantle something cheap. Elijah's mouth opened. Nothing useful came out. Marcel finally looked at him, not with anger, with measurement, the way you look at a building before you decide whether to buy it or demolish it. You own this place. Elijah blinked, straightened his jacket, found a scrap of authority from somewhere. Yeah, I do. Marcel held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds longer than comfortable. Not anymore. Elijah laughed, nervous, confused, already breaking. You can't just... I wasn't asking. Marcel turned to Alex, who was already standing, phone in hand. Call Hennessy. I want the deed, the liquor license, and this man's resignation on my desk by morning. Then Marcel looked at Samantha for the first time since he'd crossed the floor. Up close, the exhaustion was architectural, built into her bones, her posture, the hollows beneath her eyes. But her hand was still on her belly, still guarding. And she was shaking her head. Barely, almost invisible. Not in gratitude, in warning. Don't, her eyes said. You have no idea what you just started. 2 years earlier, Marcel came home to silence. That was the first wrong thing. Samantha was never silent. She hummed when she cooked, old gospel songs her grandmother taught her, melodies she didn't even know she was making. She talked to the plants on the windowsill like they owed her conversation. She left the television on in rooms she wasn't in because she said empty rooms made her nervous, that she'd grown up in a house with too many of them. But that night, the apartment was the kind of quiet that has weight, the kind you feel in your molars. Marcel set his keys on the entry table, called her name once, twice, walked through the living room past the kitchen into the bedroom. The closet door was open. Not flung wide, opened carefully, the way someone opens things when they're trying not to wake a house. Half her clothes were gone, not the nice ones. The ones she actually wore, the oversized sweaters, the broken-in jeans, the sneakers with the frayed laces she refused to replace because they'd finally molded to her feet. She'd taken the things that mattered, left the things that looked like they did. He found the ring on the kitchen counter, not in a box, not placed on a note like a movie, just sitting on the cold granite near the sink, next to a coffee mug she hadn't finished. The coffee was still room temperature. She hadn't been gone long. The note was beside it, folded once. Her handwriting, that looping, generous cursive that used to show up on grocery lists and birthday cards, and once, in the early months, on a post-it stuck to his bathroom mirror that just said asterisk, I'm keeping you. 5 words this time. I can't live this life. Don't look for me. Marcel read it 4 times, not because he didn't understand the words, because his mind was rejecting them the way a body rejects a transplant, completely, cellularly, every system screaming this does not belong here. He called her phone, dead, called it again, dead again, called it a 3rd time because the man who ran half the city's ports and controlled a network that spanned 3 states didn't know what else to do with his hands. That's when Jared arrived. 17 minutes. Marcel would remember that number later, much later, with the kind of clarity that rewrites everything. 17 minutes between Marcel walking through the front door and Jared knocking on it. No call. No text asking if everything was all right. Just Jared, appearing like a man who already knew what Marcel was about to find. I heard from one of the guys at the building, Jared said, leaning against the doorframe with the practiced ease of a man delivering someone else's tragedy. She was seen getting into a car. A man was driving. Nobody recognized him. Marcel stared at him. She's been pulling away for weeks, brother, you know that. I didn't want to say anything, but Jared let the silence do the work. He was good at that. Some people can't handle this life. Doesn't make them bad, just makes them gone. Marcel didn't speak for a long time. Then he picked up the coffee mug Samantha had left on the counter, the one still holding the ghost of her morning, and threw it against the living room wall so hard the drywall cracked. He didn't stop there. By the time he was done, the apartment looked like something had detonated inside it. Jared stood in the doorway the entire time, arms folded, watching with an expression Marcel would later, much later, recognize for what it actually was. Not concern. Relief. Marcel found her in the alley behind the kitchen. Not the kind of alley you see in movies, cinematic, rain-slicked, lit by a convenient street lamp. This was the real kind. Grease-stained concrete, a dumpster leaking something dark near the drain, the smell of old fryer oil and wet cardboard, the place where a woman 8 months pregnant sat on a milk crate during her 15-minute break because there was nowhere else to sit. Samantha had her hands on her belly, both palms flat, fingers spread wide like she was listening through her skin. Her eyes were closed. Her lips were moving, barely, silently, and Marcel realized she was counting. Breaths, maybe, or contractions, or the seconds she had left before she had to stand up and carry someone else's food again. She heard him before she saw him. Her body changed first, shoulders tightening, spine straightening, hands shifting from resting to guarding. When she opened her eyes and found Marcel standing 6 feet away in a $12,000 suit in her garbage alley, she didn't look surprised. She looked like a woman who'd been running the math on this exact moment for 2 years and had already decided how it ended. "You shouldn't be out here," she said. "You shouldn't be out here either." Silence. The kitchen fan hummed above them, pushing warm air that smelled like dish soap into the cold. Marcel took a step closer. Samantha didn't move, but something behind her eyes flinched. "Who's the father?" She looked down at her belly, ran her thumb across the stretched fabric of her uniform shirt the way she used to run her thumb across the edge of a book she was reading, absent, tender, automatic. "Someone from another life," she said. The words came out smooth, too smooth, rehearsed the way testimony is rehearsed, not for truth but for survival. "Why'd you leave, Samantha?" And there it was, the question that had lived in the walls of every room he'd entered since she disappeared. He'd imagined asking it 1,000 different ways, screaming it, whispering it, throwing it like a weapon. But standing here now, it came out plain, almost gentle, like he was afraid of what it would break. Samantha met his eyes. Something moved across her face, fast, deep, tectonic, and then she buried it. "I couldn't live that life," she said, word for word, letter for letter, the exact sentence from the note. "Don't look for me." Marcel felt the hair rise on his arms, not because of what she said, because of how she said it, the same cadence, the same pauses, the same flat delivery, like a prisoner reciting a confession they'd been made to memorize. People who leave because they want to don't quote their goodbye letters 2 years later with mechanical precision. They paraphrase, they revise, they add the things they wished they'd said. Samantha recited hers like a line she'd been ordered never to deviate from. He stepped closer. She turned slightly, reaching for the crate to steady herself, and her sleeve rode up. The scar was thin, pale against her dark skin, running 4 inches along her inner forearm. Clean, deliberate, the kind of scar that doesn't come from an accident, it came from a message. She saw him see it, pulled her sleeve down fast, too fast, and when she looked at him again, her eyes were wet but her jaw was iron. "Marcel," her voice dropped to something barely above breath. "If you ever loved me, even once, you'll walk away tonight and never come back." He didn't walk away. But he noticed something she probably didn't mean to reveal. When she said, "Never come back," her hand drifted to her belly again. And her fingers were trembling. Not with fear of him leaving. with fear of what would happen if he stayed. Marcel didn't sleep that night. He sat in his office, the one with the reinforced door and the windows that didn't open, and replayed every word she'd said in that alley until the syllables lost their shape. Someone from another life. I couldn't live that life. If you ever loved me. He poured a glass of bourbon, didn't drink it. Poured another, didn't drink that either. At 3 a.m., he called Alex. Alex picked up on the first ring. He always did. That was the thing about Alex, no ambition, no agenda, no performance. Just a man who did what was asked, reported what he found, and never decorated the truth with opinions. In an organization built on loyalty that was really just well-managed fear, Alex was the closest thing Marcel had to a clean instrument. I need you to find someone, Marcel said. Who? Samantha. I need the last 2 years where she's been, who she's been with, everything. A pause, not hesitation, calculation. Alex choosing his words the way a man chooses his footing on unstable ground. I thought she left the country. That's what I was told. Another pause, longer this time. Alex heard what lived underneath that sentence, the hairline fracture between what I was told and what's true, and he didn't ask anything else. Give me 48 hours. He was back in 36. Marcel was at a warehouse on the east side, overseeing a shipment that didn't exist on any manifest, when Alex walked in carrying a single manila folder. Thin, ordinary, the kind of folder that holds insurance documents or tax receipts. Nothing about it suggested it was carrying the weight of a demolished world. Alex set it on the table between them and didn't sit down. She never left, he said. Marcel looked at the folder, didn't touch it. She never left the city, Alex continued, his voice flat, clinical, the way he delivered all information, like a surgeon describing what he found when he opened the patient up. No passport activity, no flight records, no border crossings. For the last 22 months, she's been living in a studio apartment in Briarwood, registered under a shell company called Lennox Holdings. Briarwood, 14 miles from Marcel's penthouse, 14 miles from the life she supposedly couldn't live. She'd been that close the entire time, close enough to breathe the same city air, to see the same headlines, to hear his name on the news, and she never reached out, never surfaced, never existed as far as the world Marcel controlled was concerned. The other man, Marcel asked. There is no other man, Alex said it without emphasis. Facts don't need emphasis. No relationship records, no shared addresses, no second name on anything. She's been alone, Marcel, the entire time. The room changed temperature, not literally, but something in Marcel's chest shifted, and suddenly the air felt different, thinner, harder to pull in. The shell company, Marcel said. Lennox Holdings, who owns it? This is where Alex paused, and Alex never paused. He was a man who delivered death notifications without blinking, who'd once told Marcel a shipment worth $2 million was at the bottom of the harbor with the same inflection he'd used to order lunch. But right now, standing in a warehouse that smelled like diesel and cold concrete, Alex hesitated. Say it, Marcel said. Alex met his eyes. Gerard. The name landed in the room like a bullet casing hitting tile. Small, metallic, and unmistakable. Marcel didn't move, didn't speak. His expression didn't change. But his hand, the one resting on the table next to that thin manila folder, slowly closed into a fist so tight the knuckles went white. And something behind his eyes began to rearrange itself, quietly, permanently, the way foundations shift before the building comes down. The apartment was on the 4th floor of a building that smelled like mildew and someone else's cooking. No elevator. The hallway lights buzzed at a frequency that felt like a headache waiting to happen. Marcel stood in front of Unit 4C and knocked twice. The woman who opened the door was not Samantha. She was older, mid-50s, maybe, with reading glasses pushed up into silver locks, and the kind of face that had decided a long time ago it wasn't going to be afraid of anything new. She looked Marcel up and down, took in the suit, the watch, the $200 shoes standing on her 30-year-old carpet. She didn't flinch. "You're him," she said, not a question. "Marcel. I know who you are. She has a picture of you in a book she thinks I don't know about." The woman, Rose, didn't move from the doorway. "She's working a double. Won't be back until midnight. I need to see her apartment." "Why?" Marcel could have said a dozen things. Could have used his name like a key the way he used it everywhere else. Instead, he said the only true thing available to him. "Because I think someone I trusted destroyed her life, and I need to know if I'm right." Rose studied him for a long time. Whatever she found, it was enough. She reached into her housecoat pocket, pulled out a key, and walked him 3 doors down. The apartment was a single room. Marcel had walk-in closets larger than this. A mattress on the floor, sheets pulled tight with military precision. A window with no curtains, just a bedsheet thumbtacked to the frame. On the counter that passed for a kitchen, prenatal vitamins, a sleeve of saltine crackers, and 3 cans of soup stacked like a small fortress. A onesie hung from the doorknob of the bathroom. White, or it had been once. Washed so many times the stitching was translucent, the little printed stars on the chest faded to ghosts of themselves. She'd bought it at a thrift store, probably. Washed it and rewashed it because she couldn't afford another one and wanted it clean for a baby who hadn't arrived yet. Marcel stood in the center of that room and felt something crack in a place he didn't know he'd been holding together. Then Rose spoke from behind him. "She told me something once. Said if anything ever happened to her, if she didn't come home one night, if someone came looking, I should make sure this got to you. Only you." She held out a shoebox. Ordinary, battered. The kind you'd find at the bottom of a Payless rack. It had been stored under baby clothes. Marcel could see the fabric impression on the lid, the faint smell of detergent and something lavender. He opened it. Inside, 3 USB drives, labeled by date in Samantha's handwriting. A stack of bank transfer receipts held together with a rubber band. And 4 photographs, Gerard and Elijah, the restaurant manager, sitting together at a table Marcel didn't recognize, taken from a distance, across what looked like months. Different clothes, different seasons, same 2 men. Marcel plugged the first USB into his phone and pressed play. Gerard's voice filled the apartment, clear, unmistakable, unhurried. "You tell Marcel anything at all, and I'll make sure they find pieces of you in 3 different boroughs. You're leaving, Samantha, tonight, and you're going to make him believe it was your choice." Then Samantha's voice, smaller, shaking, but present. "And if I don't? Then I tell everyone you're a federal informant, and you know what happens to informants." Marcel listened to the entire recording, then the second, then the third. When he finally stood, Rose said his face didn't look angry. It looked like something behind his eyes had died and come back as something else entirely. "Now I need you to pause for a second and sit with what just happened. This woman, alone, pregnant, terrified, didn't crumble. She built a case from the shadows with nothing but a phone, a shoebox, and the kind of courage most people never get tested on. If that doesn't earn a like, nothing will. Hit it right now. And share this because someone watching this tonight needs to hear that fighting back doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks like a woman with shaking hands pressing record in a dark apartment. Stay with me. We're not done." Marcel was still standing in Samantha's apartment when his phone rang. Rose's number. He'd given her his 30 seconds ago, told her to call if Samantha came home before he got back. But the voice on the other end wasn't calm. It was the sound of a woman running, breath jagged, words arriving in fragments between footsteps. "She collapsed at the restaurant. There, an ambulance is coming. Someone called from the kitchen. They said she went down hard, Marcel. She went down and she didn't get back up." The shoebox was still in his hands. He set it on the mattress with a precision that didn't match anything happening inside him, and was out the door before Rose finished the sentence. He drove the way men drive, when the thing they're racing toward is also the thing they're most afraid of reaching. 14 minutes to the restaurant. He made it in 8. But the ambulance was already gone, just tire marks on wet asphalt and a busboy standing outside smoking with the look of someone who just watched something he'd spent a long time trying to forget. Marcel grabbed him by the shoulder. Where did they take her? St. Catherine's. There was a lot of blood. St. Catherine's was 11 blocks east. Marcel covered them in silence so loud it had texture. No music. No calls. Just the engine and his own breathing and the image of Samantha on that milk crate in the alley, hands on her belly, counting something only she could measure. The emergency entrance was a wall of fluorescent light and controlled chaos. Marcel moved through it the way he moved through everything, with direction and force, until a woman in surgical scrubs stepped into his path like a door closing. Grace, her badge said Dr. Grace Okonkwo. She was small, composed, and completely unimpressed by the 6'2" man in a tailored suit bearing down on her like weather. Are you family? I'm the father. The words came out before he could examine them. He didn't know if they were true. He didn't care. They were the only words that would get him past this door, and right now, doors were the only things standing between him and the woman who'd spent 2 years protecting a secret that should have been his to carry. Grace studied him the way doctors study things, quickly, completely, without sentiment. She has severe preeclampsia. Her blood pressure is dangerously elevated and the baby is in distress. We're delivering now, emergency cesarean. She paused, not for drama, for accuracy. She's in critical condition. I need you to understand what that means. Marcel understood what critical condition meant. He'd put men in critical condition. He'd stood over hospital beds and watched monitors flatten. He knew the arithmetic of fragile bodies and failing systems. But knowing it and standing in a fluorescent hallway, while it happened to Samantha, were 2 entirely different languages. Can I? No, you wait here. Grace turned and disappeared through double doors that swung shut with the soft, absolute sound of a world Marcel couldn't buy, threaten, or control his way into. He stood there, just stood there. The most dangerous man in the city with nothing in his hands and nothing in his authority that could reach into an operating room and hold together the 2 lives that mattered more than every empire he'd ever built. 20 minutes passed, then 40. Then Camel arrived. His younger sister, the one who'd stopped speaking to him the night Samantha disappeared, who'd said you let the only good thing in your life walk out and you didn't even chase her, sat down beside him on a plastic chair without a word. She took his hand, and Marcel let her, because there was nothing left to hold. 2 hours and 11 minutes. That's how long Marcel sat in that plastic chair while the universe decided what it was going to take from him. Camel didn't speak, didn't offer comfort or platitudes or any of the soft architecture people build around someone else's terror. She just sat there, hand around his, her thumb pressing a slow rhythm into his knuckle like a second heartbeat. She understood something most people didn't, that Marcel's silence wasn't calm. It was structural, the only thing keeping the building standing. Nurses passed. Machines beeped in distant rooms. Somewhere down the hall, someone was laughing at a vending machine, and Marcel felt the sound like a bruise because the world had no right to keep its ordinary rhythms while Samantha was open on a table behind those doors. Then Grace came through. Marcel stood so fast the chair slid backward and hit the wall. Grace's surgical cap was damp. Her gloves were gone. Her face carried the particular exhaustion of someone who just held 2 lives in her hands and refused to let either one fall. She's stable, Grace said. Blood pressure is coming down. We'll need to monitor her through the night, but she's out of immediate danger. Marcel's chest unlocked. Not all the way, but enough. The baby. A boy, 34 weeks, small, just over 4 pounds, but breathing on his own. Grace paused, and something close to warmth crossed her clinical expression. He's a fighter. The NICU was quiet the way churches are quiet, not empty, but held. Careful. Like the air itself understood that fragile things were being kept alive here and adjusted its weight accordingly. Marcel stood in front of the incubator and looked at his son. The baby was impossibly small. Not small the way Marcel understood small, not a smaller version of something normal. Small the way new things are small, the way seeds are small, the way a single match is small before it decides to become a fire. His skin was dark and thin and perfect. His fingers were curled into a fist no bigger than a walnut, clenched around absolutely nothing, holding on anyway. Marcel pressed his hand against the incubator glass. The surface was warm. Inside, his son's chest rose and fell with the determined rhythm of someone who had already decided, before language, before memory, before knowing anything about the world waiting for him, that he was going to stay. "I'm sorry I wasn't there," Marcel whispered. He didn't recognize his own voice. It was stripped of everything he'd built onto it over the years, the authority, the control, the careful calibration of a man who understood that tone was territory. What came out was raw, unarmored, the voice of someone who meant exactly what he said and had nothing left to hide behind. He stayed at that glass for a long time. 3 hours later, Samantha opened her eyes. Marcel was in the chair beside her bed. She turned her head slowly, drugged, depleted, surfacing from somewhere deep, and when she focused on him, her lips began to form the shape of the old lie, the rehearsed words, the script she'd been reciting for 2 years like a rosary made of broken glass. He shook his head once. "I heard the tapes, Samantha. I found everything." She stopped. Her mouth stayed open, but no sound came. Something behind her face shifted. A wall she'd been holding up with her bare hands for 22 months finally giving way. She didn't cry the way people cry in stories. She cried the way people cry when they've been drowning, and someone finally says, "I see the water." Marcel leaned forward and pressed his forehead to hers. "You don't fight alone anymore. You never should have had to." Marcel waited 3 days. Not because he needed time to plan. The plan assembled itself the moment he heard Jared's voice on that recording, clean, automatic, the way violence organizes itself in the mind of a man who's been building systems his entire life. He waited because he wanted to be still when he did it. Not angry, not grieving. Still. The way a blade is still before it finds the bone. He chose the restaurant. Not a warehouse, not a back room, not any of the dozen locations where conversations ended in ways that never made the papers. He chose the place where Samantha had carried trays for a man who grabbed her wrist. The place where she'd been planted like a prisoner in plain sight, while the man responsible sat at Marcel's right hand and called him Brother Asterisk. The dining room was empty now, gutted, tables cleared, chairs stacked against the walls, the chandeliers were off. Marcel had ordered them killed. The only light came from a single fixture above one table in the center of the room, set for one. One glass, one chair, one speaker, matte black, sitting where a plate should be. Jared walked in at 9:15, right on time. He always was. He paused in the doorway. Read the room the way men in their line of work read rooms, exits, angles, occupancy. His eyes found Marcel sitting alone at the table. No Alex, no soldiers, no visible architecture of threat. "Interesting choice," Jared said, pulling a chair from a nearby stack and sitting across from him like this was a negotiation. "You bought this place for real? Little beneath you, isn't it?" Marcel didn't answer. He pressed play. Jared's own voice filled the hollow room. "You tell Marcel anything at all, and I'll make sure they find pieces of you in 3 different boroughs." The sound bounced off empty walls, off bare floors, off the exposed ceiling where decorative panels had been stripped away. It had nowhere to hide. Neither did Jared. His face didn't collapse. It rearranged. Marcel watched the sequence, surprise, then calculation, then the brief flicker of a man deciding whether to run the numbers on a lie. Then something else, something worse. Acceptance. "How long have you known?" Jared asked. His voice was steady, almost conversational. "Long enough." Marcel played the second recording, then the third. Let each one finish. Let the silence between them do the work that shouting never could. When the last recording ended, Jared leaned back in his chair and did the one thing Marcel hadn't expected. He didn't apologize, he explained. "She was making you soft, Marcel. Every time you looked at her, I could see it, the hesitation. A man who hesitates in our world gets a funeral. I didn't take her from you." He paused, and something almost righteous moved across his face. "I saved your life." Marcel let the words settle, gave them room. Let Jared believe for exactly 3 seconds that they might land. Then he spoke, quietly, without heat, without performance, the way you deliver something final. You didn't protect me, Jared. You decided what I was allowed to love. And that makes you the most dangerous thing that's ever sat at my table. Jared opened his mouth. The door behind him opened first. Not Marcel's men. 2 federal agents, followed by Alex, who held the door with the expression of a man completing a task he'd been asked to complete and nothing more. Behind them, a second team was already loading Elijah into a vehicle outside, handcuffed, pale, his rented authority finally repossessed. Jared looked back at Marcel. For the first time, his composure cracked. You're handing me to them. Marcel stood, buttoned his jacket, looked at Jared the way you look at a door you're closing for the last time. I'm not killing you. I'm making sure you live long enough to understand what you lost. He walked out without looking back. The door closed behind him. Quietly. 6 months later, the restaurant opened on a Tuesday. Not a Friday, not a Saturday, not some grand gesture evening designed to fill society columns and generate the kind of attention Marcel had spent his career either weaponizing or avoiding. A Tuesday. Because it was a Tuesday when everything broke, and Samantha said if they were going to rebuild something, they should start where the fracture began. She named it Grace Asterisk. Not after the doctor, though Marcel made sure Grace Okonkwo had a permanent reservation and never saw a bill. Samantha named it after the thing she'd carried through 2 years of silence, poverty, and terror without ever dropping it. The thing that made her document instead of disappear, record instead of run. Build a case with shaking hands in a room the size of a closet while growing a life inside her body that the world seemed determined to crush before it arrived. Grace, not the religious kind, the harder kind. The kind you choose when choosing it costs you everything and nobody's watching to give you credit. The restaurant didn't look like the place it had been. The old bones were still there, the high ceilings, the exposed brick, the wide dining floor, but everything Marcel had stripped away had been replaced by Samantha's hand. Warm lighting instead of chandeliers, wooden tables instead of marble, a kitchen with an open window so the dining room could hear the sizzle and the laughter and the music someone always seemed to be playing near the stove. Samantha ran it, not as a figurehead, not as a name on a deed held in someone else's grip. She designed the menu, comfort food, with the kind of precision that made critics write paragraphs about a plate of braised short ribs and cornbread that tasted like someone's grandmother had blessed it personally. She hired the staff. She trained them. And on the wall behind the hostess stand, in a frame Camel picked out, was a handwritten sign in Samantha's looping cursive. Everyone who walks through this door is carrying something. Make sure they leave a little lighter. Rose worked the front. She'd resisted at first, said she was too old to be standing all night, but within a week she was greeting regulars by name and remembering what they drank before they sat down. She wore her reading glasses on a chain and called every customer baby regardless of age, net worth, or criminal record. Camel handled the books. She had Marcel's head for numbers and none of his talent for pretending he didn't care. She cared loudly, specifically, and with the kind of organizational ferocity that made vendors deliver on time out of genuine fear. And Marcel. Marcel sat at a corner table most evenings. Not the power position, not the seat that faced the door or controlled the room. The quiet one. The one near the kitchen window where the warm air drifted through. His son slept in a carrier beside him, small fist curled around Marcel's index finger with a grip that defied every medical chart about premature strength. The calls still came. The world he built still turned. There were rooms in his life that would never be clean, decisions that would never sit comfortably in the light. He knew that. He'd stopped pretending otherwise. But there was a room now. This room, this table, this improbable family assembled from wreckage, and held together by a woman who'd refused to let the worst thing that happened to her become the truest thing about her. That belonged to something his empire could never touch. The dining floor was full when Samantha finally sat down across from him, not carrying someone else's champagne, carrying her own glass. She raised it. He raised his. The chair didn't wobble. The table was hers. The table is hers, and you stayed for every moment of it. That tells me something about you, that you don't watch stories like this for entertainment. You watch them because they mean something. So here's what I'm asking. If this story earned the space it's sitting in right now, in your chest, behind your eyes, wherever you're feeling it, then like this video. Share it with someone who needs to know that surviving counts, that quiet strength is still strength, and that the people who love you will find the truth eventually. And if you're not subscribed yet, come on now. You already know you belong here. Hit that button. I'll see you in the next one. And I promise you it hits just as hard.